Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the top 10 lessons learned in astrophotography after doing this for 1 year. My name's John Robinson, the Astrotard. This is the Deep Sky channel. I've been shooting astrophotos now for a year. I got started in the hobby last year, 2018, during Black Friday, when I went crazy and bought some equipment. And I'd like to share with you my top 10 lessons learned over the last year of shooting images. Here we go. 3 categories: equipment, data capture, and post-processing. Number 1, start with a refractor. I started with a Schmidt Cassegrain. It was a great starting rig, but for astrophotography, it wasn't the right choice. I really believe refractors are the way to go. The reason is you get crisp pinpoint stars, which when you're looking at a photo is what really matters. And with the Schmidt Cassegrains, I think the focal lengths are too long, unless you're using a Rasa. And I also think that the star quality is reduced because of the mirror and the chance for football-shaped stars. So get yourself a refractor, spend the $3,000 on it or whatever it is. Get yourself an APO triplet refractor so that your red, green, and blue are all focused on relatively at the same place. Okay, tip number 2: when choosing your equipment, you want to keep in mind the arcsecond per pixel rule. I mentioned in another video that ATIC had done a great job in discussing why arcseconds per pixel between 1 arcsecond and 2 arcseconds per pixel was the optimum. And the way you determine arcseconds per pixel is determined by the focal length of your telescope, your OTA, as well as the resolution of your camera. So those 2 factors, and here's the formula how to do it, will determine what your arcseconds per pixel are. So you want to shoot for between 1 and 2 arcseconds per pixel. The reason for that is if it's below 1, your stars will be fat and fuzzy. If it's above 2, then you're going to really ask 1 pixel to represent 1 star, which will make your star look sort of square. So the sweet spot is between 1 and 2. That's a lesson learned. Lesson number 3: a black and white camera is better than a color camera. Even if you want to produce color images, the black and white camera is going to do a better job of producing color images in the end. Another YouTube blogger whom I really respect, Dylan O'Donnell, has done a great video, and here's a link to it, describing why black and white cameras are better. And basically, I'll summarize the work that Dylan did and say it this way, that if you use a color sensor, you're going to be biased towards green. You're going to be collecting too much green photon information, and the reality is most objects in the sky are red. And so it's going to be biased towards green, and you're going to miss out on a lot of data. If you use a black and white camera, it doesn't care what color the photon is, red, green, or blue, or some combination. If it's a photon, it's going to be captured. And so you're going to get much more data, and faster data. And you're able to do some things. If you're going to separate red, green, and blue into different channels, you can recombine them later to produce different mixes, either a true color mix or a Hubble palette mix. So I think it's more flexible, and it's a better quality image that you're going to have if you choose a black and white camera. Okay, a big lesson here is number 4. Astrophotography photos take time. When I first got started in the hobby, I was quick to, shoot, 5 or 6 objects a night, collecting maybe 1 hour or even 30 minutes on a target. and I would go in and process it, and it would look grainy and fuzzy, and I'd wonder, well, what's wrong with my camera? What's wrong with my process? And as it turns out, you really need to spend a lot more time on your targets. For me, shooting at f7, I need to spend at least 12 hours of data capture on one target. And the other lesson as part of that is, don't try to shoot more than 1 or 2 targets a night. Just plan your evening to focus on one target or maybe 2 targets and capture data on those 2 targets only. Don't be all over the sky. Lesson number 5. Narrowband is much better in light polluted skies. I live in suburban North Dallas, Texas. Bortle 7 skies, as they're called here, which is sort of an indication of how bright the sky is around you, how light polluted it is. Bortle 7 is very light polluted, and what I notice is when I shoot with red, green, and blue filters, that I get a lot of noise that comes back in the subs. Here you can see some examples of that. But when I shoot in narrowband, it's a lot more forgiving, and I'm able to filter out a lot of that noise, light pollution. So that's the lesson there, is that narrowband works a lot better in light polluted urban areas. What do I mean by narrowband? I'm talking about the filters that you use in front of the camera: hydrogen alpha, oxygen, and sulfur. There are other narrowband filters. There's a nitrogen filter, for example. I haven't really experimented with that, but I think you get good spectrum of coverage of the night sky if you just focus on those 3. Most of the stuff out there in the universe is hydrogen anyway, so that's always going to be your strongest signal. Anyway, the 3 common ones for narrowband: hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. That's what we mean by narrowband. Okay, lesson number 6. Make a plan for what you're going to shoot before you start shooting. I use Stellarium to make a plan for what is visible in my night sky, keeping in mind the obstruction that I have in the north and some of the trees and some of the light polluted school that's nearby me. I have to sort of keep in mind where my optimum visual viewing range is for the telescope, and based on the time of year, I can sort of use those 2 factors, the obstructions and the time of year, to choose the target for that evening. And Stellarium is a great way for me to choose those targets. There's another helpful app that I use on my smartphone. The name of the app is Skyview. Basically, you just point this up at an object in the sky, and it sort of tells you, you can line up on it, and it'll tell you what it is that you're pointing at and what star it is. You can also type in the name of a star that you're looking for, and it'll tell you where it is and help you find it in the night sky. Very useful, handy app when doing alignment. Okay, lesson learned number 7. What I found based on trial and error is the best exposure time for maybe a faint object out there in the sky is between 4 and 5 minutes long. And if I go more than 5 minutes, I run the risk that either I'm going to get some asteroid or some airplane crossing through the image, and I'll have to throw that sub away. I also run the risk, if it's more than 5 minutes, that any breeze that blows will cause my stars to go out of focus and become more of an oblong shape. So between 4 and 5 minutes for a dim object like the Wizard Nebula or the Heart Nebula would be my recommendation. And for very bright objects like Orion or the Eagle Nebula, between 1 and 2 minute exposures. In fact, Orion is so bright, I shoot that one with 30-second exposures. It's the brightest object out there in the sky that I can see. So let that be a guide for your exposure time. If you overexpose, for example, Orion, if you tried to do a 5 minute exposure on Orion, you would get this big white blob. You would oversaturate the signal would be so strong it would just be 100% white on all your pixels. So anyway, let the brightness of the object dictate the exposure time that you use. It's a lesson that I learned. Okay, lesson number 8, and this has to do with the post-processing. I use PixInsight for post-processing. What I did in early days of my image post-processing was I used the histogram stretch tool, and I was really trying to get a black sky in the background. And the way I did that was I used the black point finder in the histogram tool. And if you click on an area of the sky that you want to be black, and it'll set it as black. If you do that, yeah, you'll get a nice black background sky. But by doing so, you lose data. And what you're going to get is fuzzy, jaggedy looking areas within your object. Here's what I'm talking about. Here's an example where I was making an attempt to make the sky black by using the histogram, by resetting the histogram black point, and in so doing lost a lot of the data. So don't do that. Don't reset your black point. Lesson learned number 9. Lume channels. When you're doing post-processing in an object, and I guess this is true even for a color image, use the Lume channel to great effect. The Lume channel will have an ability to clean up some of the dirty subs. It can be used to really sharpen the area of your image, and it can be used to brighten up the area of your image. And really, the Lume channel can really give what would otherwise be too dark or difficult to see, will really help the images pop if you use it in a right way. So it was a very powerful discovery for me when I realized that the Lume channel makes a lot of difference in the quality of the image in the end. Okay, lesson learned number 10 is calibration frames. Calibration frames, I learned that I need to reshoot those things every time the image train changes. What I mean by that is, say for example you get some dust on the surface of your telescope on the lens, and you wipe off that dust. The very act of wiping off that dust and cleaning it off is going to mean that you're going to need new calibration frames, specifically the flats. Because anytime those dust bunnies change, all your calibration frames are no longer effective as they would have been before. So for that reason, I try to leave my image train untouched. I don't wipe the lens. I don't change the orientation of the camera. I try to leave it untouched for as long as I can, because as soon as you change that imaging train, you need to reshoot your calibration frames. And speaking of those calibration frames, when you're shooting flat files, go for a constant white source. Sometimes in the early days, I would point my telescope to the sky and hope that I would get a constant or consistent cloud or brightness factor within the camera when I was shooting the flats. But what I found was there was too much variance as the clouds would roll past the sun, that my flats would be affected one to the next. And so what I decided to do was upgrade to a constant light source. I now use a tracing pad. An LED tracing pad is my light source for the flat files. So those are my top 10 lessons learned. I hope this is helpful to you. Thanks for watching. We'll do more fun videos next time. See you later.